In the beginning, before the first human hand ever shaped clay or lifted stone, the earth belonged to something else entirely. Not gods, not demons, something in between. Beings woven from the very substance of fire before fire had learned to burn with purpose. The ancient Arabs called them the Djinn, and they did not arrive with civilization. They preceded it. They watched the mountains rise from the sea. They walked the empty plains of Arabia when no human eye had yet seen them. To understand the Jinn, you must first release everything you think you know and step back into a world that was never truly empty. The Quran states it plainly and without apology. The Jinn were created from smokeless fire, mari min nar, a substance both more refined and more volatile than the clay from which humans were shaped. But pre-Islamic Arab tradition goes deeper still. The poets of the desert spoke of the Jinn not merely as creations, but as the original inhabitants of a world that humans had only recently been permitted to enter. They possessed intellect. They possessed will. Some chose righteousness. Others chose a darkness so ancient it had no name. What bound them all was that fundamental essence: fire without smoke, heat without light, energy without form. Pure, unpredictable, eternal. Islamic tradition preserves a remarkable account. Before Adam walked the earth, the Jinn had already ruled it for thousands upon thousands of years. They built, they warred, they filled the world with their civilizations and their conflicts. But their age of dominion ended in catastrophe. Violence so total, so consuming, that the divine turned away from them. Angels were dispatched to cleanse the earth. The surviving Jinn fled to the wild places, the deep deserts, the forgotten valleys, the spaces between the living world and something else entirely. They did not disappear. They retreated. And in that retreat, something within them changed. They became watchers rather than rulers, ancient rather than young, bitter, some of them, patient, all of them. Not all Jinn are equal. Ancient Arab scholars and storytellers cataloged them with the precision of naturalists studying dangerous animals. At the lowest order stood the Jann, minor spirits of the desert, unpredictable but manageable. Above them, the Jinn proper, the vast and varied middle class of the spirit world. Then the Sila, shapeshifters of terrible ability who could wear any face, any form, any voice. The Ifrits, warriors of fire and fury, bound to no human law. The Marids, oceanic beings of immense power, ancient beyond reckoning. And at the summit of this terrible hierarchy, the Jinn kings, 7 rulers who governed their people as surely as any earthly caliph governed his. Each with a domain, each with a name that carried weight. In pre-Islamic Arabia, the relationship between humans and Jinn was intimate in ways that the later religious tradition would complicate. The great poets, the Sha'ir, were believed to draw their inspiration directly from Jinn companions who whispered verses into their ears. Every celebrated poet had his Jinn, his familiar, his invisible teacher. The word Sha'ir itself means both poet and one who perceives, one who sees what others cannot. These were not comfortable arrangements. Jinn demanded things in return: attention, respect, the acknowledgement that the words did not wholly belong to the human who spoke them. To be a great Arab poet in the age before Islam was to live perpetually at the threshold. 1 foot in the human world, 1 foot in something altogether more dangerous. The Jinn do not dwell where humans feel safe. They claim the in-between spaces, the threshold places that have always made the human animal uneasy. Abandoned ruins speak their language. Crossroads hold their breath when Jinn pass through. The deep desert, where the sun becomes a weapon and the horizon loses all meaning, this is their truest kingdom. The Arabs of the ancient world understood this geography instinctively. You did not travel the deep desert without awareness. You did not sleep in the ruins of old habitations carelessly. You did not pour scalding water on the ground without a warning, for a jinn might be resting there, unseen, and an angered jinn remembered a slight longer than any human lifetime could measure. Among all the kinds of jinn, none commanded more fear in the ancient texts than the Ifrits. They appear in the Quran itself. It is an Ifrit who offers Solomon a supernatural feat of power, boasting it can carry the throne of the Queen of Sheba across the world before a man can rise from where he sits. The Ifrits were the warriors, the rebels, the beings who had chosen power over harmony. They burned with an anger that went back to before human memory. They were not evil in any simple sense. They were simply beyond the ordinary negotiations that governed jinn and human relations. To command an Ifrit, ancient texts agreed, required more than knowledge. It required a kind of courage bordering on madness. No figure looms larger over the history of human-jinn relations than the prophet King Solomon, Suleiman, in the Arabic tradition. He alone, according to both Quranic text and the vast body of folklore that grew around his name, was granted authority over the jinn. Not the gentle jinn only, but the Ifrits, the Marids, the Sila, all of them. They built his temple. They dove into the ocean to retrieve pearls and coral. They carried mountains if he commanded it. But Solomon's power was bound to a single object, his ring, engraved with the name of God. Ancient stories linger over what happened when that ring was briefly stolen. The jinn, released from obligation, ran wild across the earth. And the world learned what unconstrained jinn power truly looked like. The most famous image in all of jinn mythology is also among the most misunderstood, the sealed vessel. In the original traditions, long before European fantasy stripped them of their menace, the bound jinn in a bottle or brass container was not a gift. It was a prison. And the jinn inside had been there long enough to make promises it did not intend to keep. The story goes in stages. In the first century of its imprisonment, a jinn swears to make its liberator rich beyond imagining. In the second century, it swears kingdoms. In the third and fourth, it swears revenge. By the time any ordinary human stumbled upon such a vessel, it had been waiting inside for a very long time, and it had stopped being grateful. Of all the jinn's terrifying qualities, none provoked more cautionary folklore than their ability to take human form. The Sila, the shapeshifters, were said to be so accomplished in this art that they could pass years living among human communities undetected. The old stories are filled with signs to watch for: a person who never eats with others, eyes that catch the firelight wrong, reflecting it rather than absorbing it, a beautiful stranger who arrives with no history and no kin. The most persistent tales concern the Sila who married into human families, who raised human children, who walked human roads, and who one day, for reasons unknowable, simply left. Always at night. Always without explanation, and always with something taken that could never quite be named. Among the most intimate and unsettling beliefs in jinn mythology is the concept of the qareen, the companion jinn assigned to every human being at birth. Not a guardian, not an enemy, something stranger than either. The qareen was believed to be a shadow self, bound to you from your first breath, whispering suggestions that may or may not be your own thoughts. It knew everything about you, your fears, your desires, your moments of weakness, because it had been present for all of them. The Prophet Muhammad was said to have converted his own Quran to Islam. For ordinary humans, however, no such clean resolution was offered. Your Quran stayed with you. It would be present at your deathbed. And what happened to it after, the old scholars declined to say. The Marids stand apart from all other jinn as a category unto themselves, ancient even by jinn standards. Their power measured not in fire, but in water, storm, and the deep places of the world. Where the Ifrits burned, the Marids drowned. They inhabited the oceans, the underground rivers, the great storms that swept in from the sea without warning. The Bedouin trading fleets that crossed both desert and ocean treated the Marids with a specific variety of respect, elaborate and costly. You did not sail deep waters without acknowledgement. You did not take from the sea without giving something back. The Marids were proud in a way that transcended mere arrogance. It was the pride of something that had existed since before the ocean itself had learned its current boundaries. When the great storytelling tradition of the Arab world crystallized into what the Western world would eventually call 1001 Nights, the jinn became central to its architecture, not as monsters to be defeated, but as forces of transformation. Scheherazade herself is engaged in a contest of wits that mirrors the ancient dynamic between human cleverness and jinn power. The jinn in these stories grant wishes, yes, but they grant them with the precision of a contract lawyer working against his client. They fulfill the letter of the request and destroy its spirit. Every word choice matters. Every phrasing can be a trap. This is the oldest lesson the jinn mythology carries, that these beings did not hate humans. They simply found humans endlessly, perpetually, dangerously easy to outthink. The jinn did not merely wander, they organized. Ancient tradition describes complete jinn societies running parallel to human civilization, courts with kings, disputes with laws, wars with casualties, and peace treaties that could last centuries. The 7 jinn kings each governed a day of the week and a planet in the sky. Mudhib governed gold and Sunday. Mara the white governed the moon. Al-Amar, the red, was a king of fire and iron, a jinn so ancient that his name appeared in texts that predated the Islamic era entirely. Human sorcerers who attempted to contact the jinn courts were, by all surviving accounts, entering negotiations they rarely understood fully and almost never controlled. The courts were not hostile to humans, but they were not interested in being subordinate to them either. Among the most feared of all jinn encounters was possession, not the dramatic, theatrical kind of later tradition, but something quieter and more insidious. The Arabic word majnun, meaning mad or driven to madness, carries the jinn within it. Majnun, one who has been touched by the jinn. The ancient world understood certain kinds of madness as the result of jinn inhabitation, not punishment precisely. The jinn did not necessarily intend harm, but their presence in a human mind was like fire housed in a vessel made for water. The fit was wrong, the pressure too great. The mystics and healers who specialized in such cases, the Rakis, operated according to elaborate protocols. The jinn inside a person had a name, a grievance, a history, and it had to be addressed as such, not driven out, negotiated with. Where there are jinn, there are those who have always known how to hold them at bay. The protective traditions of the Arab and Islamic world developed with the jinn in mind, specific, detailed, and not left to chance. The throne verse of the Quran, Ayat al-Kursi, was recited before sleep as armor. Iron was a repellent. The jinn reportedly could not abide its touch. salt laid at thresholds, specific invocations before entering dark spaces, before pouring hot water, before passing through ruins. The phrase, Bismillah, in the name of God, spoken before any significant action was understood to create a barrier the ordinary jinn could not cross. These were not superstitions. They were the accumulated wisdom of a people who took the existence of the jinn as seriously as they took the existence of the desert itself. The Quran contains a remarkable chapter, Surah al-Jinn, the 72nd surah, that describes a group of jinn who heard the Quran being recited and converted to Islam on the spot. They returned to their own people to preach. This is not a metaphor. The text treats it as reported history, and it establishes something theologically profound. The jinn are a community capable of belief, of choice, of salvation or damnation by the same criteria that governs human souls. There are Muslim jinn who pray. There are jinn who follow other paths. There are jinn who have rejected every offer of guidance and burn with ancient grievances. The moral landscape of the jinn world mirrors the human one almost exactly, except that it has been in operation for tens of thousands of years longer, and it has seen things that humans have not. Perhaps the most human-feeling corner of jinn mythology concerns not their power, not their hierarchy, not their ancient grievances, but their capacity for attachment. The folklore of Arabia, Persia, and across the Islamic world preserves dozens of tales of jinn who fell in love with human beings. These stories are never simple. They are not romantic in any comfortable sense. A jinn's love is fire. It consumes what it means to warm. The human beloved inevitably suffers, not from cruelty, but from the fundamental incompatibility of what they are and what the jinn is. The most tragic versions involve the jinn taking a human away to their realm entirely, not as a prisoner, but as a cherished companion, and the human slowly becoming unable to return to the human world. Caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. It would be a mistake, a comfortable but wrong mistake, to consign the jinn to the past tense. They are not a dead mythology. Across the Arab world, across North Africa, across South Asia, wherever Islam traveled and intertwined with local tradition, the jinn remain present in ways that no official theology has entirely displaced. Families pass down knowledge of which places to avoid. Healers trained in Islamic tradition continue to practice the discernment of jinn affliction. In the mountains of Morocco, the ceremony of Gnawa calls the jinn by their ancient names, to negotiate and restore harmony. In the villages of Yemen and the cities of Cairo, the jinn are spoken of not as legend, but as neighbors, difficult, ancient, and demanding the same basic courtesy that any neighbor deserves. The jinn endure because they address something the rational mind cannot fully satisfy. The intuition that we are not alone in this world, and that what shares it with us is not necessarily benevolent, not necessarily malevolent, but deeply and irreducibly other. They are older than our religions, though our religions have absorbed them. They are beyond our morality, though they have agreed to be measured by it. They watch from the places we do not go. They remember things that happened before our oldest ancestor drew breath. Tonight, when you pass through a dark doorway or pause at a crossroads, or feel for a moment that the shadow on the wall is not quite your own, remember what the ancient Arabs knew. The world is not empty. It has never been empty. And some of what fills it was here long before the first human fire was lit.